All right, we're live. Hello, everyone. I am Eve Rickert. I'm the publisher at Thornapple Press. I am joining today from the unceded traditional ancestral territories of the Lekwungen and Saanich peoples on the west coast of Vancouver Island, colonially known as Victoria. And I'm here with Nillin Lore, who is the author of this amazing new book, just out, called How Do I Sexy? A Guide for Trans and Nonbinary Queers. And Nillin, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, my name is Nillin Lore, and I'm streaming here from Saskatoon on Treaty 6 territory, which is homeland of the Métis. Yeah, a little bit about myself is I just turned 38, which means I've entered my official existential crisis period. And with that has come a lot of, self-identifying and queer identity things. But I am gender flux, ADHD, which for those who don't know is the nice, beautiful intersection of autism and ADHD. It's wonderful, as well as queer and polyamorous. I have two partners that are very near and dear to me, and a very loud senior cat who is deaf. And she's very vocal. You might hear her. We've tried to do our best to dampen the sound, but if you do hear just like an absolutely pained yowling, there's no animal in harm. She's totally fine. And yeah, I guess that's kind of like the basics. I'll go into a whole bunch of other things as we go through the conversation, but like, yeah.
Yeah. Well, so congratulations on your first book coming out on Friday. I can tell you I'm pretty happy with the sales so far. It's already
I heard actually. I was asking Hazel about it a little bit, and she was telling me that it was looking really good, and I was really happy. So
yeah, so lots of interest from small booksellers and that sort of thing, which is always really nice. So I'm excited about it. But I want to hear you talk about it. So tell us about this book.
Yeah, so How Do I Sexy? It's really interesting because it really originated, the whole concept of it, back in, I think, like 2015 or 16 as a blog post. And so I had been working a little bit on Tumblr and a little bit on my sex blog and stuff like that. And one of the jokes that I was always making with my partners at the time was like, how do you sexy? Like, what is sexy? And as trans and queer and non-binary individuals, we didn't really have a clear answer for that. We weren't really quite sure what it was. Fortuitously, though, I happened to early on in my kind of blogging career and writing career, I got to meet Jiz Lee very, very quickly out of the gate, which was kind of wild when you think about it. But Jiz approached me about doing some little mini reviews for scenes from the Crash Pad series. And the Crash Pad series is a queer, trans, non-binary, independently produced sort of organization where a lot of the scenes are beautifully set up of a bed and an apartment, and the performers are just given the free rein to kind of do whatever feels good, whatever feels affirming, whether or not they're fully clothed or what have you. And it kind of really, really reconceptualized the idea of sex, relationships, and pleasure for me in a really profound way. So I wrote this little blog post of How Do I Sexy with a couple little tips for kind of fledgling NB queers and trans folks out there. Things about like keeping your binder on if you really want to, that you don't have to be completely naked. Different ways to touch. Penetrative sex isn't important. Orgasms aren't important. Don't be afraid to cross dress or dress what's affirming, so on and so forth. But it was a little snippet, right? Mm-hmm. And so over the years, kind of writing my blog, I've written about a ton of other topics, and just kind of extrapolated upon that to the point where I literally had like a decade of answers, ideas, theories, conversations, interviews about how do you sexy. But it was all snippets, all these different posts spread out all over the place, and trying to organize it was just kind of like, oh my God. So I thought, time to put it in a book. So getting to pitch that to, I'm so sorry, post nasal drip. Mm-hmm. Getting to pitch that to Thornapple all the time.
Both of us, excuse me, are a bit under the weather right now. It was something we were discussing before the live stream started.
So sorry.
I have a cough drop. That's why I'm sort of.
But yes, so getting to pitch that to Thornapple was really fun and exciting. like everyone else, or not like everyone else, but I had read more than two. I'd been seeing more than two online for a long time when it came to polyamory. And I'd been, I had known Kevin from, poly role models and stuff like that, who wrote Love's Not Colorblind. I had already met him in different circles. And so it was a no-brainer to kind of come to Thornapple with it, and knowing about what the organization or the publishing company was doing felt just so perfect. So yeah, essentially this is 10 years of mistakes, heartbreaks, dysphoria, euphoria, microblogging, breakups, hookups, all of that is it's all in here. And what I would kind of recommend, as well as some feedback from other individuals. One of the things I wanted to make sure is, with something that's this kind of personal and this like kind of complex, it's good for me to be, sharing my experiences, but it's also really good to share perspectives and experiences from others as well too. So I tried to do that as best I could.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if you could talk about that a little bit. So, we talked about kind of the format of this book, and it sort of walks this line, as a lot of, I think, contemporary literature does, between sort of like memoir and advice. And so do you want to talk a little bit about why you took that approach, what readers will find in here as far as the, personal story versus sort of instructional stuff?
Yeah, for sure. I've always found, even on my blog and at presentations, and I've given a lot of presentations over the years, educational presentations, little workshops for queer community, and that people just generally really respond more to conversation than instruction when you're doing in certain environments. Not to say that instruction doesn't have merit, obviously, but I've always found that I get the most interaction and I get the most like positive feedback and people saying like, wow, that really like sunk in for me, that really resonated with me, when it's more of conversation than it is instruction. So I really wanted people to be able to pick up the book and feel like they were basically sitting down with another trans or non-binary queer person, maybe with more experience, with more stories to tell, with more resources to give, and to just like have a conversation with them, ask all the hard questions, ask the embarrassing questions, and just like be guided gently through it, kind of like more compassionately, more focused on, that kind of caregiving kind of guidance sort of approach sort of thing. Especially since like, for myself, that's something that I just never had, especially from my parents, as well as community. I grew up, as a military kid, so I was on CFB, Canadian Forces bases, kind of all throughout my life. CFB Moose Jaw was where I was actually born, and then I was kind of transferred to Trenton and Ottawa and so on and so forth. And it's a really interesting kind of space to be in as a queer kid, because especially a queer kid that's like not really understanding what they're going through and experiencing, because all around you is it's the rigid kind of military, traditional buzz cuts, walking.
Imagine.
Yeah, really intense. Meanwhile, though, something I kind of get into the book a little bit about is like my first kiss and my first ever, I guess, like physical and romantic experience ever happened with a boy in his bedroom closet, which I always think is a hilarious detail, and it literally did happen in his closet. And he was his family was part of the military as well too, and that was such a formative experience, and it was so positive to me. But everything else around me just was suggested that was awful. Like everything about that was terrible. We shouldn't have been doing it. We were disgusting. We were bad. We were going to go to hell. Jesus is watching us. If our parents ever found out, like, what was our dads going to do? They were very, rigid kind of disciplinarians. And sadly, that just kind of fizzled out. And I just kind of fell to the wayside of like, spending decades after that trying to bury it and trying to hide it and trying to avoid it. One of the things I talk about in the first chapter is what I call the Ventura effect, and it was a really huge influence. It's funny because I've talked to other trans queers since writing this, and each one of them had like a different movie to say, like a different experience to say. So for me, the Ventura effect was Ace Ventura, Pet Detective, with the whole plot line of the main villain secretly being a trans woman who is duping everybody and making these men be tricked into something, and she's nefarious and scheming. So it painted this picture of like, trans people being out there to sexually assault you, to take advantage of you, and to be criminal in some way or form, right? That they're dangerous. And it's a shame because like I love Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey is a great person, so much fun to watch and stuff like that. But seeing him heave and pretend to vomit on screen along with multiple other characters about this trans woman, and all they did was kiss. That's it. They kissed in the movie. Was really devastating. And I actually remember in the theaters watching it, and like I'm there with a bunch of friends. We're there at a birthday party. They're all laughing. They're all fake dry heaving, and I'm doing the same thing. Meanwhile, like I'm shaking inside, like physically shaking because I kiss kids. It was so funny that when we were doing our kind of thing together and exploring together, I didn't think about much of the time, but it wasn't gay because I was the girl, you see. So that's okay. It's heterosexual now, right? So in hindsight, there's a lot to unpack there with gender identity, but that's fine. That was later down the line. But yeah, and so like that whole idea of the Ventura effect, and like not only being raised in the military and having that huge impact on me growing up, and all the messages that I was getting, that everything I'm thinking, everything that I'm feeling is wrong. And then to have that affirmed in everything that we're supposed to love: film, television, video games, books. What do you do with that, right? And so if I had that one person, whether it was an adult or another, another peer or a friend, who was able to sit with me and kind of affirm and be like, it's okay, like here's the actual big picture of things. I couldn't even fathom what effect that would have had on me and how it would have changed the course of my life, which is why I wrote How Do I Sexy, and why I wrote it the way that I wrote it is because I really wanted to do that for others. Yeah.
Great. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really sorry that all that happened to you. So many people, I know it's, yeah. I hope that things are, I know that in a lot of places things seem to be going backwards, but I hope that a lot of kids growing up now are not having quite
it's so weird on that side too, because like things do seem to be going backwards, but then you go to Pride itself and like you walk out of that going like the kids are all right, but they're not, they're okay here at Pride, but outside of it, it's not. Yeah.
So can you talk a bit about how this book is different from other books in the genre?
I mean, like, honestly, there's quite a few other like little kind of books in the genre and stuff like that I've seen over the years. A lot of them though were kind of published beforehand, you know what I mean? Like a lot of them are a little bit older at this point in time. Not that there's not any merit from them, but this is kind of one of the more recent modern ones. What I feel really sets this one apart too is that it's unapologetic about sex and pleasure specifically. Is a lot of books, when they're kind of framing discussion of sexuality, it's coming off quite either more clinical or medical, or kind of just being careful of like they don't want to make it too much for people or to be too controversial. Whereas with How Do I Sexy, I didn't want to think about any of that. I just literally wanted people to know that queer sex is awesome. It feels great, and there's no shame in that. And so everything that I approach in the book, I really try to approach completely and utterly unapologetically. And I really hope that, anyone kind of coming through it and reading it, that's what kind of sets it aside from them, is seeing, my perspective as well as the perspective of the various individuals who contributed kind of their own experiences and thoughts, that we're unapologetically queer and trans and gender diverse. Like there's nothing to be sorry about there, and there's nothing to be shameful about there. So more than anything, like, I see it as like as a very, 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 very clear focused self-empowerment book. But again, about that pleasure piece. Even when you're in a lot of queer spaces, even when you're getting sexual education that's maybe more clear inclusive, even when you're getting normal sexual sex education, normal, whatever that means, it's often not pleasure focused. Pleasure is not a thing that's discussed. Safety is what's discussed, and that is important. But like, we are humans, and we do experience pleasure. We have emotions. Sex feels really great to a lot of people, and I really don't like that that's ignored so often. So yeah, being in the book and being able to have Crash Pad series, again, going back to be able to provide some, PG-13-esque 14A sort of images, to show all these people with different bodies, different shapes, different sizes, different ages, different ethnicities, cultures, identities, and so on and so forth, all just absolutely beaming and smiling in these intimate scenes, like, you know, and that's what I wanted the whole book to be, is as you're reading it, even if you're going through some of the heavier stuff, you're finishing you know, each chapter or each section or the whole book smiling. Yeah.
I also appreciate that there is sort of a political edge to it too, which makes it such a great book to be a Thornapple book, because we just eat that stuff up.
Yep.
And I love that you included a section on amatonormativity and the relationship escalator.
Yes, yeah,
So
that was really important to me too, because like that was something that I had kind of, you know, again through other Thornapple books, but even researching online, was like, even if you're not polyamorous, that does impact like all relationships, that amatonormativity and the relationship escalator and the expectations about it. So even if you're a queer reader who's not polyamorous, who's not non-monogamous, like that, it's relevant to you. It's gonna form your perceptions of your relationships, and it's going to inform your decisions whether or not you're fully cognizant of it or not. So I would love to make you cognizant of it and go like, oh, you don't have to do the whole process of like, okay, dating, and like we got to wait until this date to have sex. We got to be together this long before we move in. We have to have kids. We have to, because what else is our purpose in life if we don't?
Actually wondered. Speaking of which, for those who aren't familiar with these terms, could you define? Probably, I mean, a lot of people are familiar with relationship escalator, but you can define that. But also amatonormativity, I expect, is still going to be a new word for a lot of people.
That is true, yeah. And amatonormativity, kind of similar to other normative sort of concepts we're talking about, kind of refers more to this this whole assumption that we're all seeking. This assumption and expectation that we're all seeking like monogamous committed relationships, essentially, and that we're all seeking the same journey, the same experience of family and those bonds, sort of thing. Which I think that's pretty much it. I'm pretty sure.
I think that's the relationship escalator, and then amatonormativity, at least as I understand it, is the idea that romantic relationships are the best, most important kinds of relationships, and you know, should be the focus of our lives. And like, you know, along with that sort of escalator related ideal that like your goal should be to find. I mean, this shows up in non-monogamy too, you know, one or two or more romantic relationships that, so yeah, it's just the idea of putting romantic. Yeah.
But yeah, and that's really interesting for me too, as an individual, because like I'm gray romantic. So that was always a weird expectation for me too, and a lot of pressure in my early relationships. I used to be married, and I'm divorced now. But that was one of the hugest struggles that I had in my marriage, honestly, was I never felt what they wanted me to feel, right? There was like, you know, like how they experienced the love and affection in our relationship was always so big and grandiose. And when I wasn't expressing it the same way, when they perceived that I wasn't feeling the same intensity or the same experience, it just caused a lot of struggles in our relationship. So that was really, really, really kind of rough. Yeah. So anyone on the, you know, the aspec or even aerospec sort of range would have a lot of struggles with that amatonormativity. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And for those who don't know, when we talk about the ace spectrum, we're talking about the asexuality spectrum, and the aro spectrum refers to aromanticism. So folks who either don't experience romantic love or romantic attraction, or don't experience it at the same level or the same degree as what's normalized in society or by popular culture.
I'll try to be better about defining the words when I say them.
Right.
It's so funny because, again, like one of the things that y'all had me do was like, you know, the bold words in the book and defining them. So just so you're aware, if you are reading the book, you will get the glossary in the back. So.
Well, I think for those of us, you know, who are used to talking to peers who maybe are familiar with terminology, we can forget that, like, you know, if we're talking to a broader audience, we often need to define a lot of things that we take for granted. So
yeah, absolutely.
That's just me, the editor, and me.
No, I appreciate it, because like, yeah, I'm the type of person that's been talking so much publicly about these things, specifically to you know, I guess like more experienced kind of trans and non-binary audiences that, yeah. So fine.
So what are some of your favorite parts of the book? Like, what are some things that you were really excited you got to write about, or that you're really excited for people to read, or that you think are particularly important or new or revelatory?
I think, and it's funny too, because like one of my favorite whole sections in terms of like the more, I guess, like the heavier content was definitely talking about chapter 5, which was saying no to traditional gender roles and other toxic ideals, because it really allowed me the opportunity to sit down and actually take all these things that I'd been struggling with and feeling pressure from, and literally like mapping them all together in a way that you saw that all this internalized shame that you're feeling, all this guilt, all this fear, all this that's holding you back from living authentically or having the relationships that you want. It's not just coming from you. Like you're not the whole sole reason of this happening. Like, so I spent so long blaming myself, like, why am I such a coward? Like, why can't I just do this? But when you actually look at the web of cisnormativity, heteronormativity, amatonormativity, gender roles, capitalism, colonialism, boom, 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 and you realize just how much the world is set up to not allow that existence, or not allow a lot of existences, especially when you get to intersections of queerness and race, and queerness and disability, and if that even overlaps even more, it's really hard to celebrate yourself, and it's really hard to even begin to unpack anything that's like making you feel that you can't be yourself, when all of that is just there, and it's unknowable until you really sit down and look at it, and then have to face it directly and say, oh, this is a problem, and this is like, set boundaries with almost like society yourself in certain ways. I'm not going to read the comments anymore. People say that, but I'm genuinely not going to read the comments anymore. I'm not going to sit at family dinner when my uncle's making transphobic and queerphobic jokes. I'm just not going to do it. Like, I'm not going to go to certain films, or I'm not going to let my friend play Joe Rogan in the car, or I'm going to get out and whatever it is. Like, you can remove yourself from those things. So that chapter is really important to me, because I really hope that it gives people a better sense of what is in their life that's kind of like keeping them unhappy, or keeping them unsure of themselves, or unfulfilled, and ideally taking the steps as safely as they can. Unfortunately, a great deal of us are in unsafe living situations, but those unsafe living situations might be the only option. And so setting boundaries with family members, with support organizations, with caseworkers, can be very challenging, with doctors, and knowing what options you have for advocating for yourself, for finding supports, for taking care of yourself if you can't make the change right now that you need to. That's what I hope this chapter really kind of instills in people. And that's such a huge part to finding your sexy, because whether or not you're fully aware of it, that absolutely impacts, not just your libido, but like how you perceive yourself and how you feel you are. So how could you possibly, feel sexy and feel desirable when, again, all of this is telling you that you shouldn't exist and that you're not sexy and desirable? But then we get into the mixed messages, which is also covered a little bit in the book, but talking about how at the same time, porn is a huge thing, and in porn, trans women and queer individuals are fetishized to a huge extent. They're sexy, they're exotic, they're, ooh, how cool! Like, we can invite the trans girl into the bedroom to have a threesome as a straight couple, and that's okay, because like, she's a girl, but she has a penis, and blah blah. There's this really weird kind of fetishization that happens there, and you see all these scenes of cisgender and heterosexual individuals or couples having really intense, passionate sex with trans and queer people, but it's all superficial, and you can feel that superficiality, because it has nothing to do with the trans or queer individual's pleasure or safety or sense of wellness or self-worth. It's all about the pleasure of the people using them. So that's a weird thing for society to say, you're really hot and sexy and we want to use you for pleasure, and you're a really fun little kind of treat to have on the side, but also you shouldn't exist. Like, that's a lot of mixed messaging. And again, I hope that this book kind of really tackles that quite a bit. So yeah, that would be like the main kind of like chapter I think would be that I'm really proud of. But also the fun one is is like, get your sexy on. I loved going through that. I definitely like, in hindsight, I didn't have a lot of, a lot of these ones are very mainstream kind of, or very more known of some of the expressions and the things. And I wish that I had put in maybe a little bit more of like some more of the more racialized identities and some of those sorts of things, which is something I'm actually tackling in my next book with speaking to a lot more diverse voices and things like that. But I do feel that there's there's a lot in here for everyone, and I hope that like people can glean what they can and come out from it kind of saying that like, yes, this is a guide, but it's not a rule book, right? Like it's like if I want to be a lumbersexual but I love goth, combine the two, that's fine. Like gothy lumberjack, awesome, cool, go for it. Like you can do what you want, but like this is just kind of meant as an idea of like to kick that creativity, and that chapter is just fun. It's a fun chapter, so yeah.
Great. So at one point, we had a conversation about the subtitle of the book, which had to do with like the audience of the book, because I had wondered if the subtitle now is a guide for trans and non-binary queers, and I had wondered, should we say and their allies or and those who love them? So we had this conversation about like, well, this book would be useful to cis folks, but so do we want to include them in the title? And you decided that you didn't want to go that direction. And so I wondered if you could talk about that decision and, who this book is for and why you did it that way.
And this is going to maybe sound a little harsh. Some people are going to maybe be a little bit defensive about it, but that's okay. But like, I didn't write it for allies, right? Like, and like, I really, really wrote it for trans, non-binary, and gender diverse people. We don't have a lot of books. We don't have a lot of resources. And there's a lot of expectations about, what if we are allowed something, like to what degree, and we have to share it somehow, or we have to dampen it or tone it down or something. I didn't want that to happen at all here. I wanted to be able to talk about things in there, about like how to identify when allyship is toxic and isn't serving you and comes from a place of selfishness, where and it does happen, where individuals are there, to say, but I'm such an ally, but they're not really doing anything, and how that feels. And, I didn't want to feel that I had to think about, hurting allies or family, when really the whole point of it was really, really, really creating the sense of safety and empowerment for the people that are very vulnerable, who are very marginalized, and really struggling. I have seen a couple of reviews though of like of individuals that have said, this book isn't quite for me, but like I bought it for my partner. Or I have a friend that's really struggling and I bought it for them, and we both read it separately and then talked about it afterwards. And that's awesome. That's good allyship. Yeah, it's just, it needed to be a book that, whether closeted or not, whether proud or not, whether far along their journey or brand new, or literally just heard the word online and they're starting to question themselves, you could walk by that book and unquestionably say, that's for me. Especially when there's no other ones on the shelf, right? So that's kind of why it was most important to me.
Yeah. Following up on that, I want to follow up on the toxic allyship comment. Could you talk a little bit about what that looks like? Maybe from both sides of it. How do you know if someone is being a good ally or not? And maybe if you want, those of us, who want to be allies, what good allyship versus toxic allyship looks like to you.
Yeah, for sure. I really appreciate the question. This is a huge part of my next book too, by the way. So yay. Yeah. So like, I've been, part of the community for quite a long time, and I've seen a long gambit of kind of different forms of allyship. And I will say that one of the things that I've learned over the years is, as I've been hurt, as I've been harmed, as I've struggled with homelessness and abuse and prejudice and street harassment and so on and so forth, there were times where my standards or my expectations for allyship went really, really high. I was really tired of the thoughts and prayers. I was really tired of the, you're there at the Pride Parade and you're all dressed up in rainbow flags, but then you're gone for the rest of the year. We don't ever see you or anything like that. I was getting really tired of like, the families that like, oh yeah, we support LGBT people so much, but they just kick their trans kid out. It's like, what are you doing? But I also acknowledge that like that's a different sort of thing. That's the toxicity. That's the selfishness, and that people's capacity is quite different. And so when I'm talking about an ally, if all you can literally do, whether it's like because of your ability or your time or whatever, donate $20 here. You see, you know, an LGBTQ person getting harassed on the bus, and you sit next to them. Anything that you can do in those little small ways, like that is good allyship. And like, I'm not saying that you have to be at the front of the picket line, you know, standing in the way of, you know, the white supremacists and TERFs. Like that's a TERFs. Okay. Trans exclusionary radical feminists, by the way. White supremacists, self-explanatory. But yeah, so, you know, for LGBTQ folks, I always kind of say that, like, you know, if you find that the support that you're supposedly getting comes with any conditions at all, then you're dealing with toxic allyship, right? Allyship support should never be conditional. You know, like, you either support LGBTQ plus people or you don't. If you're going to support your trans kid, yes, I get it. You can struggle with some things. You're scared for their safety. You're overwhelmed with, you know, how people are going to treat them, how people are going to treat you. These are all things in your head, and that's great. And I'm really sorry that you're struggling with that, but that's for you to work on. And it's not for your kid or your marginalized person to go through, you know what I mean? And to do that emotional labor for you. So, you know, if you're living at home with your parents and they're doing a lot of great things, but also there's little jabs about, like, you know, oh, well, we're really trying with your pronouns, but, you know, it's really hard for us because blah, 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 blah. It's like that's, you know, we're getting to certain kind of points there of like keep an eye on that. And, like, you know, if they're really okay with you transitioning, but they expect you to do it slowly and on their terms, and, you know, you can't wear these things, but you can wear these things, that's not allyship, that's controlling behaviors, right? So just kind of knowing the difference between sorts of those things. One of the other things I kind of see, unfortunately, a lot is, like, you know, there's a lot of individuals that, like, will come out to events and you know, they'll be on their phones and they're taking selfies and stuff like that, and it's all about them as an ally. And allies are great, but if you're out at an event, no matter what that event is, that you're helping marginalized people, and you're there for the ally shirt, you're there for the ally praise, then you're not doing good allyship. That's not what it's about. You know what I mean? There's quite a wide gamut of things, but really what it comes down to is being able to identify the red flags between controlling, manipulation, guilt, and abuse, and how, if any of those sorts of things are kind of rearing up in little small ways. And I think the big one for me is the conditional thing, right? It's like, so many times we support you, but we're okay with this, but, you know, like, oh yeah, gay and lesbian people, they're great, but bisexuals and pansexuals and polysexuals, make up your mind. You know, oh, trans women and trans men, I completely upset. I understand, but what's with these they, thems, and zems? And that's the toxicity. That's the fake allyship and stuff that you're kind of looking for, right? So, in terms of allies, like, what they can be doing, you know, again, like, there's a wide range of things, and, like, I think nowadays, by far, the most important thing that you can do is vote. You know, we're looking at a lot of legislation. We're looking at a lot of policy development, even here in Canada, that's extremely anti-trans specifically. And, you know, a lot of queer people are even kind of feeling a little bit we're getting little divides in the community sometimes too. Like, we some of us have gotten really good rights enshrined and stuff like that, and we don't want to lose those. And if we're seeing that another part of our community is being threatened, you get kind of scared to be an advocate of that, because you don't want to lose what you have. But if we lose what we have, you do too, right? So it's not a secluded thing. It's a cascading thing. And as allies, by far the best thing you can be doing is voting, is educating yourself as much as you can and reading. And the other big thing I would be saying, yeah, like, oh my God, like, this book, it's so good. And the other big thing is, you know, in public spaces, especially too, the amounts of times that I see or hear about, like, a trans person on a bus, who, you know, absolutely shaking, bawling when they get home because of all the abuse that the security guard that was following them around, some guy that was screaming that, like, he's going to kill them or whatever, parents, like, you know, pulling their kids away, like, they're by the bathroom, and so on and so forth. Those microaggressions are happening a lot. And if you happen to see any of them, you don't have to cause a big, like, scene, or you don't have to jump in and, like, literally throw fists, but sitting next to a trans person and talking to them as they're being yelled at, walking with somebody who's being harassed in the street and just having a conversation, as long as it's safe, obviously. Like, if you're seeing a big crowd and weapons, you know, maybe calling the police is a better option, as much as ACAB. All cops are bastards. That's that one. Sorry. But yeah, so
And to elaborate on that,
yes,
there's always beyond the slogan, for those who might be considering calling the police, you do need to weigh the severity of the situation and your own ability to intervene versus the potential risk to the trans or non-binary person of having a cop show up, because police are also a significant source of violence towards people in that community. So that's where that
yes,
that's the elaboration of that.
Yep. No, exactly. And so exactly. It's like if you're seeing that crowd of people around a trans person and you going involved in there might also lend to, your harm. That's where you would probably have to make that sort of call. But but even outside
generally
of
avoid calling the police if you can for any reason. Yeah.
But even outside of that, you can start really small, like at home, like you're sitting around the dinner table and Uncle Larry is telling another joke about, using some trans slurs and just shut it down, conversation is getting really heavy about Trump and you can see your queer person, like your queer family member or trans family member having a hard time, change the conversation, just help them shut it down. You're at work and you're seeing pronouns not being respected and the effect that it's having, go with them, go to a supervisor, go to a manager, advocate with them. There's all these little things that you can do, and you might think like, oh, that's just one person. That's huge. That's massive. One person is a big deal. If you make that difference in one person's employment, in their home life, in their safety in the community, on the street, that's massive for us right now, especially with all the stuff that's going on. That makes a huge difference for, one of the sad facts that I often reflect a lot on is the fact that at 38, like I've outlived my life expectancy as a trans and non-binary queer, according to statistics. And that's a lot to process, hence the existential dread. So, we can make that number go and go and go and go, like higher and higher and higher. We can have the gayest nursing homes. Oh my God, that would be fabulous. But these are the things that we need to be doing, is making those differences for each individual and voting.
Yeah, something you said earlier about the transactional nature of some allyship. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's something that I have experienced sort of in the working with, supportive abuse survivors and assault survivors. Right. This sort of expectation, particularly if it's at a community level where you're trying to create safety for someone, that can often come with strings attached for, certain performances of gratitude, certain kinds of behavior, or, dealing with your trauma in a certain way, certain expectations of relationship, and none of that. I actually, on my personal blog, I have a survivor's bill of rights that addresses some of that. You might like it. I'll send it to you if I can remember when we're done.
Yeah. And one of the things I do want to point out too is I understand that for a lot of parents, there's the way that we've been raised and there's the stuff that and how, some of these new concepts and they're not as new as you think for one thing, but I digress. It can be scary. And I know that for a lot of parents that can get really, 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 kind of controlling or maybe wanting to rein it in, that it comes from a place of fear. Like you're afraid for your kid. You're worried that your kid, that they're going to be living this life that's harder as a trans person or as a gender diverse person. And that's very, very scary. And I get that, right? But the alternative is that they don't live, right? And you don't want that either. So as scary as it is, and as confusing and overwhelming as it can be, and as frustrating as it might feel, putting in the work and listening and being compassionate and empathetic, whether it's your kid, whether it's your partner, whether it's your roommate, your best friend, your coworker, it's the way to go. It's the thing to do, as scary as it is. Yeah. So. Oh, I can't hear all of a sudden.
I had muted myself. I was just reminding our viewers that if they want to submit, we're going to wrap up in the next 15 minutes or so here. So if they want to submit any questions, just post it as a comment on the post that you're viewing, and we'll see it here and we can respond to it. Cool. But I wanted to ask you, so what is, if you could have people just take away one big thing from your book, what would that be?
You're sexy. Honestly, like I think the big thing that I really, 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 really want people to take away from this book is that like there is absolutely no right or wrong way to do this, right? And I know that like, you know, that might seem overwhelming and stuff like that, but that you know, you don't have to compromise very much on who you are whatsoever, and like you or at all. And I just really, really want people to feel that even if there's a sense of loss that like, oh, what if people don't talk to me? What if my family disowns me? What if my partner breaks up with me? That is awful. And I really, really empathize with that. But I promise you, it is so much better on the other side when you're fully, fully living as your authentic self and you know, I'm going to say it, like, be selfish, do it. Like, you know, we're expected to just constantly compromise and tone things down and to make ourselves more palatable for the rest of society and for the people around us. Stop. Don't do it. It's really, really not a life well lived. When people talk about at the end of their life that they live a life well lived, for trans and queer people, it's as yourself fully. So that's what I hope they take away from it.
Yeah. So you mentioned a few minutes ago your next book.
Yeah.
Tell us about your next book.
Okay, so I got another book deal with Thornapple. I'm currently writing Carry On, Unpacking Your Internalized Transphobic and Queerphobic Baggage. And I'm seeing it as kind of like a companion piece to How Do I Sexy. You won't have to read both of them, is the big thing, right? You can definitely get a lot from both of them, for sure. I would highly recommend that you would get a ton from them. But Carry On is a lot more, you know, where How Do I Sexy is a lot more about relationships and self-worth and you know, sexuality and pleasure and dating and navigating kind of society and building that life that you really want for yourself. Carry On is really about like digging really, really, really deep and seeing all the small little things that we think for about ourselves and all the things that have held us back, and whether we're fully out of the closet, partially out of the closet, there's something in here that's like is for you. It's really, really for you. One of the things that I kind of always talk about is like, you know, for myself, like I have all these expectations about like how I look, how my facial hair is. Like I'm not on HRT just yet, you know, and I'm not really sure if I'm going to fully do it, and if I do it, like to what thing. And to me, I'm internalizing all that, being like, am I even trans? Do I have any right to like read about these things? Or I'd never say that to somebody else. But why am I internalizing it? Where is that coming from? That's what this book is about. I mean, not only just that, is like talking about, you know, a lot of intersections with like how much of that is entrenched in culture, religion, social circles, and so on and so forth. I got to talk to a lot of amazing people, therapists and counselors like Iris Akbar and Bushra Ahmed, talking about you know, not only internalization, but setting boundaries and how important that is, talking about the impact of culture on identity, talking to Dr. Cyrus Marcus Ware about, you know, literal racism in the queer community and the impact that has on not only feeling, you know, like a queer person, like a queer man, but also, you know, as a Black individual as well too. You know, I talk to trans folks, I talk to ace folks, I talk to aro folks. I've done a ton of research. The amount of research that's gone into this book is huge, and I'm so excited to share it, because even in amongst a lot of it, once again, it's a conversation, right? It's a conversation with you, to gently say it's okay, and it's okay to feel like crap, and it's okay to feel these things about yourself. You're not a bad person, but you don't have to carry that on, you know. So that's the name of the book. Look at that. So yeah,
I'm really excited about it.
Yeah, I'm stoked, and I also have like a bunch of other kind of things on the side that I'm kind of mulling over. I may have in an ADHD state and in a hyper excited state, like planned out 10 years worth of books, guides and outlines and everything, and kind of how Do I Sexy would be very complemented by Carry On, and how Carry On and How Do I Sexy would be very complemented by We're Here. Wink, wink. I'm just trying to get my publisher to sign me again.
Right. So we have some questions, some audience questions. Now, I think what happens when I hit show, yes,
oh my
it
God,
goes up on the screen. Any
Sweet.
advice for parents of teenagers who are gender nonconforming? I was never so close to throwing hands as I was when my parents told me to essentially put my kid back in the closet.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, just let them be. I think that the best thing that you can really do with gender nonconforming kids, especially, is just like that pure patience and freedom of like kind of that self-exploration. Let them make mistakes, let them try all the different things, love them, hate them, whatever it is. I think that like obviously like safety being, a concern of certain things, but like, and I always hear like the tough one again, and that's where the fear of the parents come from, is like, how, is it safe to let my kids dress a certain way and go to school? Yes, no, I don't really know the answer to that. It's really hard to say. Realistically, there's bullies. Realistically, there's transphobic parents. There's queerphobic members of staff. Those are really realistic things. I think that like, even taking baby steps a little bit and testing the water is a great idea. I think that as a parent, being a great advocate and offering education to the school and suggesting people to come in to train staff and to go to PTA meetings to inform them, those are all really great steps to make school and upbringing for your gender nonconforming kids safer. That way they can focus on exploring themselves and you can focus on creating a safer world for them. So, yeah.
Great. And our next question: how do you balance the authentic self with sexy, with needing a work zona? I ask as an NB femme with facial hair. I'm comfortable with my hair, my boss less so.
Oh, that's a shame. Fire your boss. Yeah, that's kind of tough. I mean, like, as far as I'm concerned, as long as you're literally not violating any policies, it doesn't matter what your boss thinks. If they don't like your queer expression, but you're not violating those policies, then like, I would definitely encourage you to keep going along those lines. But there's also like a lot of ways that like, if you do want to compromise, you can compromise just to the limit. If it's too short and you go a little bit longer to where you're comfortable at most, then feel free to do that sort of thing. Also keeping in mind that you can incorporate a ton of things very subtly into your outfit and stuff like that. And that, especially one of the big things I talk about in the book is dapper queer. Oh, dapper queer. Perfect for the workplace. Bow ties, suspenders, nice dress shirts, carefully manicured beards, wear a harness underneath your shirt. They're not going to know. Fuck it. So, it's like there's all these different ways that you can do things, different belts, different types of pants, incorporating, especially with dapper queer, what I love is that you can go really with different eras, going back to 60s, 70s, 50s, bringing that into more modern time, looking at Don Draper, looking at Doctor Who. Doctor Who is dapper queer as heck. And again, like looking at where that line is maybe in your dress code and literally take it right to that line so that you're as affirmed as you can be, without actually having anything that they can actually get you in trouble with. So I'm a firm person of like, if there's a rule that you're worried about losing your job or something like that, like go right to it. They can't fire you, but go right to where you want to be. Yeah. So
I would just add that there are some important legal differences between the U.S. and Canada. So the two of us are in Canada. Gender, I believe it's gender identity. I'm not sure if it's gender identity and expression, but it is. What's that?
I don't think expression.
Okay, so yeah, gender identity is a protected category in the Canada Human Rights Code. Yeah. It is not federally in the U.S. and under the Bill of Rights. So they can do a lot. And in general, I think that Canadian laws are more protective of workers than, not nearly as much as they need to be, but are more protective of workers than in the US, particularly if you're in a union. So that is something to consider as well, that we are speaking from a Canadian context.
But yeah, I mean, and even in those contexts, like it's a lot of work, but like, if I was in the States, I'd be looking at those laws and I'd be looking at what those lines were and what those safety kind of places are for me, especially with, yeah, you're right, like any unions, especially, or saying that like, I would just encourage you to do absolutely the most that you can do to feel affirmed and comfortable at work, even if it's not necessarily what you wish it would be. It's better than not, right? And never forget what you can hide under your clothes. When I was closeted and I worked, in an office setting, I wore bras and panties underneath my work clothes. Like I presented very, 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 very masked. Of course, in hindsight, I didn't sound mask. But like I didn't realize that at the time. People were like, aren't you gay? I'm like, no, what are you talking about? I'm not gay. I like girls. But like, hiding things underneath your outfit that feel affirming, and it sucks to have to hide them. But if it feels good to wear, a binder, if it feels good to wear, like a nice little bralette, if it feels good to wear panties or a packer or whatever, do your best and like do wear that to work. You can put that on your clothes. So yeah.
So we're getting close to the end here. Is there anything else that you want to say, or anything that I didn't ask about that you wish I had asked about?
I mean, no, I think I'm feeling pretty good about it. I'm really excited about a couple of the readings that I have coming up. So I did want to kind of throw out that I think it's on tomorrow here in Saskatoon. I have my launch event at Turning the Tide. That's at 7 p.m. CST, and so I know that quite a few locals will be watching this recording or whatever later. So please don't miss it. That's a good chance to ask any questions. We can chat and get your book signed. As well as on Wednesday the 28th at, again, 2 p.m. actually, I'm going to be doing an Instagram live streaming with Shelf Life Books, which will be really, really exciting. And then I believe the next one is September 4th with Under the Umbrella, which is really, really cool. No, that's Cross and Crow's book. And that's really cool because I'm going to be talking with Matsui Ryu, who is a psychologist, and I've seen the questions that they have ready for me. I'm really, really excited to kind of go in on that one, and that'll have a lot more kind of like theory and thinking about like the social implications of things. And I love the way that they're going to be picking my brain about that, and about how we're going to have some more questions, not just for trans and non-binary folks, but also for counselors, therapists, clinicians, and that sort of thing, getting to kind of gear it a little bit in that way. But yeah, just genuinely, I really, 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 really hope people pick it up. I really hope they enjoy reading it. I really, really wanted to make this very conversational. If you know me on social media, if you see my site, like, don't hesitate to send me an email. Don't hesitate to send me like a message. I am perpetually online, and I try to be as accessible that I can be to a reasonable extent for my own boundaries as well too. But like, don't be afraid to reach out if you have a genuine concern of a situation, or if you really have advice that you want to be, something in here really resonated with you and you want to know more. Like please definitely do reach out, and reach out to some of your other like local community resources that you have. There's tons of stuff in the area people don't realize. Support groups, pride organizations, educators, speakers, authors in every city, in every community, even the most conservative and traditional ones. We're there. We're everywhere. We're here. The name of my third book.
I'll also mention that I think all of those events are listed on the Thornapple Press Facebook page. So it's like just facebook.com/thornapplepress/events. Also, if you go to thornapplepress.ca and go to our books, you can find this book. You can find all the links to buy it, and I think all the events are listed on that page as well. So those are the two places to find.
Be sure to look at the other books. Like, there's a lot of Thornapple that's really, really cool, and like there's a lot on there that like I'm starting to collect myself to read as well too. I guess you kind of have to inform yourself a little bit if you want to keep writing about stuff. So trying to do that reading. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who watched today. And again, the book is How Do I Sexy? A Guide for Trans and Nonbinary Queers, Nillin Lore. Find it at thornapplepress.ca. And thank you all so much.
Thanks, Eve. Thanks, everyone.